the diner was always quietest between 3 and 4 in the morning. It wasn't the kind of quiet that made you sleepy, it was the kind that made you notice every little sound. The hiss of the coffee maker, the soft clink of a fork in the back sink, the muted hum of the neon "open" sign, flickering like it had a secret to tell. Grace Molina sat in the Craner booth with her Bible open and her prayer journal balanced on her knees. She'd worked the night shift at Clover's Diner for almost 2 years, since the divorce and the avalanche of bills that followed. It wasn't glamorous, peeling wallpaper, a jukebox that ate quarters, and floors that squeaked like gossiping neighbors, but it kept her and her 7-year-old daughter fed. Most nights, that was enough. Tonight felt different. Her pen hovered over the journal, the page nearly full of prayers that looked more like grocery lists for heaven. Lord, please cover rent. Lord, please help Sophia at school. Lord, please keep the transmission from dying. But as the old wall clock ticked toward 3:03 a.m., a strange urge made her write something else entirely. If you send me a miracle, Lord, make it something I cannot mistake. She didn't know why she wrote it. Maybe it was the way the moonlight spilled through the fogged windows like silver silk, or maybe it was the hollow space in her chest that no amount of coffee could fill. She closed the journal, slid it under the counter, and went to refill coffee for a pair of truckers at the counter. That's when she heard it, the high, sharp squeal of tires on icy pavement. Her head snapped toward the window. A sleek black car fishtailed on the empty road, headlights slicing across the diner's facade. In the heartbeat between breath and action, Grace was already running, apron flapping, sneakers pounding against the frost-bitten asphalt. The car slammed sideways into the guardrail, metal screaming against metal. Steam hissed from under the hood. She yanked the back door open, her breath catching when she saw him, a little boy, no more than 8, strapped into a car seat, eyes wide and glassy. "It's okay, honey. I've got you," she said, fumbling with the buckle. "Don't let them send me back," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the ticking engine. Grace didn't have time to ask what he meant. She hauled him out just as the smell of gasoline hit her. A faint crackle, then a small flame licked at the crumpled hood. She clutched the boy against her chest and ran. The fire popped behind them as she crossed the lot, shielding his face from the glare. When they reached the diner door, she turned, scanning the driver's seat. Empty. Whoever was behind the wheel was gone. Red and blue lights splashed across the diner windows as sirens approached. The boy's small fingers dug into her coat like anchors. "Sweetheart, what's your name?" she asked, brushing his hair back. He hesitated. "Oliver." "Well, Oliver, you're safe now." He looked up at her with something between fear and wonder, as if she'd stepped right out of a dream he'd had once, but forgotten. A police officer opened the door, barking orders into his radio. "Ma'am, is he with you?" Grace opened her mouth, then closed it again. The truth was tangled. She'd never seen this child before, but in some impossible way, it already felt like he belonged to her. She crouched, looking into his eyes. "I'm not leaving you, okay?" His small nod was barely there, but it was enough. The officer led them toward the ambulance, asking questions Grace couldn't yet answer. Who was driving? How did she get him out so fast? Did she know his family? She shook her head each time, clutching Oliver's hand as if she might lose him to the cold night air. As they reached the ambulance, Oliver squeezed her hand. "I prayed for you," he said softly. Grace's breath caught. "When?" He murmured. "Before tonight. I asked God to send me someone who wouldn't leave me." Her heart thudded once, twice, then that strange sentence she'd written less than 10 minutes ago came roaring back. "Make it something I cannot mistake." Somewhere behind them, the black car hissed and smoked under the streetlights, but Grace barely noticed. The boy she'd just met, the boy who prayed for her, wouldn't let go of her hand. and she wasn't sure she ever wanted to. The ER smelled faintly of antiseptic and burnt coffee. Grace sat on a molded plastic chair, Oliver curled against her like a small shadow. A blanket swaddled him, his dark hair damp from melted frost. Every few minutes, a nurse would appear, check his vitals, and ask the same question. "Is your father here yet?" Oliver would shake his head. Grace didn't know how to answer when they asked about her relation to him. She kept saying, "I just found him." It sounded inadequate, like calling lightning a flicker of light. When the double doors swung open, she noticed him immediately. Tall, sharply built, a charcoal wool coat over an immaculate black suit, and eyes scanning the room like a hawk in search of prey. She knew his face, though she'd only ever seen it in the business section of the newspaper someone left behind at the diner. Ethan Hawthorne, CEO of Hawthorne Technologies, one of the richest men in the state. A man who kept his life airtight, controlled, untouchable. But the moment his gaze found Oliver, the armor cracked. He crossed the room in 3 strides, dropping to one knee in front of the boy. "Buddy, you okay?" His voice was low, urgent. Oliver nodded, but didn't move. Ethan reached to lift him, but Oliver's small hand clamped tighter around Grace's. His eyes darted between them. "She pulled me out," Oliver said simply. For a second, something flickered in Ethan's expression. Surprise, gratitude, maybe even suspicion. "Thank you," but his tone was clipped, controlled. "I owe you for saving my son." Grace shook her head. "I don't owe you anything. She just happened to be there." The nurse interrupted with forms for Ethan to sign. Grace eased back, thinking this was her part in this strange night ended. But Oliver's grip didn't loosen, even as his father urged him. "She's nice," Oliver said, voice soft but firm. "Can she come home with us?"
Ethan glanced up, startled. Grace almost laughed at the absurdity. "I think your son just made a request," she said. "He makes plenty," Ethan replied, straightening. "Most I don't grant." The nurse returned Oliver after a quick check, announcing he was fine to go. As they turned toward the exit, Ethan paused, looking back at Grace. "You work nights?" "Yes, Clover's Diner." "Then you're used to unpredictable hours." She frowned, not following. "I'll be in touch," he said, and guided Oliver out into the night. It wasn't until they were gone that Grace realized her pulse was still racing, not from the accident, but from the strange feeling she had when Ethan Hawthorne looked at her, like he was evaluating her not as a stranger, but as a potential answer to a question he'd been carrying far too long. The next afternoon, Grace was wiping down a booth when a shadow fell across the table. She looked up to find Ethan Hawthorne standing in the diner doorway, sunlight knifing past him. He was wildly out of place, tailored coat, polished shoes, in a place where the fanciest thing on the menu was a chicken pot pie that cost $8.99. "Mr. Hawthorne," she said cautiously. "Ethan," he corrected. "Can we talk?" She glanced at her manager, who raised his eyebrows but waved her off. They slid into the booth. Ethan rested his hands on the table, the posture of a man used to deals, contracts, leverage. "I have a proposal," he said. "Oliver, he doesn't warm up to people easily, but he did with you. I want you to consider being with him for a while, a few weeks, at the house." Grace almost laughed. "You mean like a nanny? Call it whatever you want, but temporary. I'll pay you well." She shook her head instantly. "I have a job and a daughter. I can't just... I'll arrange for childcare for your daughter during your shifts and pay more than you make in 3 months here." Grace opened her mouth to refuse again, but then remembered the eviction notice now folded in your purse. She studied his face. "Why me? You could hire any professional." "Because he chose you," Ethan said simply. Something in his voice pulled her up short. Still, pride made her stall. "If I said yes, there'd be rules." "Name them." "Boundaries, my own space, freedom to leave if I feel out of place, no personal entanglements." His jaw twitched, maybe at the last one, but he nodded. Agreed. By the time she clocked out, she'd agreed to start in 2 days. That night she wrote in her prayer journal, "Lord, I don't know if this is the miracle or a test, but I'm saying yes." Ethan's driver arrived promptly at noon. Grace packed light, clothes, her Bible, Sophia's photo. Her daughter would stay with Grace's aunt temporarily, excited at the idea of auntie time. The Hawthorne estate loomed ahead like something out of another century. Vast gates, manicured grounds, a house with more windows than she could count. A butler named Jameson met her at the door, eyeing her modest suitcase with curiosity. Ethan appeared moments later, Oliver peeking from behind his leg. "You're here," the boy said, smiling in a way that felt like a private welcome. Grace knelt. "Told you I wouldn't disappear." Ethan cleared his throat. "Your room's upstairs. Jameson will show you. I trust we remember your terms?" She smiled faintly. "Trust, but verify." The room was larger than her entire apartment, with a balcony overlooking gardens in winter slumber. After unpacking, she found Oliver in the library building a fortress from books. "Come on," he said, "I'll show you the real secret rooms." As he tugged her down a hallway lined with portraits, Grace caught Ethan watching them from the landing above, his expression unreadable, except for the faintest shadow of relief. Grace quickly learned the Hawthorne estate was beautiful but hollow, like a stage set. At breakfast the next morning, Oliver ignored the elaborate spread from the chef and asked if Grace could make pancakes. She obliged, ignoring the chef's glare. Ethan entered halfway through, pausing at the sight of his son laughing with a mouthful of syrup. "This isn't on the menu," the chef said stiffly. "Maybe it should be," Ethan replied, surprising them both. Later, Oliver led her to the Echo Room, an unused ballroom where he liked to shout just to hear the sound bounce back. They raced their voices across the space until they were breathless with laughter. From the doorway, Ethan stood unnoticed, his gaze softer than she'd ever seen. For the first time, Grace wondered if she wasn't just here for Oliver, but for a man who'd forgotten what warmth felt like. The library smelled faintly of old paper and lemon polish. Oliver had set up his blanket fort in the corner, armed with flashlights and a pile of comic books. Grace was sprawled beside him, reading aloud in dramatic voices that sent him into fits of laughter. But her eyes kept drifting to a door at the far end of the room. It was half hidden behind a tall plant, locked with a brass keyhole. "What's in there?" she asked casually. Oliver glanced up, chewing his lip. "Dad's study. Nobody goes in, not even me." She let it go, for the moment. Later, while Oliver was at his tutor session, Grace wandered the second-floor hallway. Sunlight pooled on the polished floors, catching on the frames of old portraits. Near the end of the corridor, she stopped at one in particular, a photograph, not a painting. It showed Ethan and a woman with chestnut hair, her head resting on his shoulder, both laughing at something unseen. She was beautiful, not in the polished way society pages liked, but warm, alive. The plaque beneath read, "Lillian Hawthorne, 1989 to 2020. Grace traced the edge of the frame with her finger, feeling an ache that wasn't hers. A voice behind her made her flinch. She hated that picture. She turned. Ethan stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets. "Why?"
Because she said her hair was frizzy. His lips twitched, but his eyes stayed shadowed. Oliver doesn't talk about her much. I don't, either. Grace studied him for a moment. He asked me if angels could visit Earth? Something flickered in his expression. And what did you tell him? That sometimes God lets them, but they don't always have wings. His gaze lingered on her for a heartbeat too long before he turned away. Dinner's at 7. The following morning, Grace woke earlier than usual. The house was still, save for the occasional groan of the old heating system. She padded to the kitchen, determined to make something simple for Oliver before the day began. The chef wasn't there yet, so she found flour, eggs, and milk, whisking them into pancake batter. The smell soon filled the air. Oliver wandered in, hair rumpled, eyes bright. "You're making real food," he said. "This is the realest," she teased, flipping a pancake. He grinned, sitting at the island. "Can we make a smiley face on mine?" When Ethan entered a few minutes later, he looked from Oliver to Grace, then to the plate in front of his son. A pancake with chocolate chip eyes and a strawberry mouth. "I see we've abandoned the menu again," Ethan remarked. though there was no edge in his tone. Grace offered him a plate without comment. He hesitated, then sat and took a bite. His brow lifted slightly. "Not bad." Oliver beamed. "Told you." It was a small thing, breakfast, but Grace saw something shift in Ethan's posture, like a man loosening a tie he didn't realize was strangling him. The storm came in the form of a woman in heels. Ethan's older sister, Charlotte, arrived unannounced one afternoon, striding into the living room with the confidence of someone who thought she owned the air itself. "And you must be the nanny," she said to Grace, her smile sharp as glass. "Oliver's latest project. I take care of him, yes." Charlotte's eyes flicked over Grace's thrift store sweater. "I suppose we all take what work we can get." Oliver, sensing tension, slipped closer to Grace. When Charlotte made a cutting remark about women with motives, Grace didn't rise to the bait. "I'm here because Oliver asked me to be. That's all." Charlotte's smile thinned. "We'll see." She left as quickly as she came, leaving behind a silence that felt colder than the winter outside. Saturday morning dawned clear and brittle. Oliver stood in the driveway with his bike, training wheels still attached, watching other kids ride past them without them. "I can't," he muttered when Grace suggested trying. "You can, and I'll be right here." She steadied the bike as he wobbled down the path, whispering encouragement. On the fourth try, something clicked. His balance held, his feet pumped the pedals, and he was flying. "I did it!" he shouted, circling back. Ethan, who had been watching from the porch, smiled in quiet amazement. He hadn't seen that much joy on his son's face in years. Grace caught Ethan's eye, and for a moment they shared something wordless but powerful. It was Vivienne who brought the past crashing back. She arrived on a Tuesday evening, tall, poised, wearing a perfume that seemed to linger like a memory. "Ethan," she said warmly, "it's been too long." Her gaze landed on Grace, taking in her simple cardigan and jeans. "And this must be the help." Grace felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I take care of Oliver," she said, her voice steady. Vivienne's smile was pitying. "Of course you do, and I'm sure you're very dedicated." Over dinner, she made veiled comments about young women with an eye for opportunity and the dangers of misplaced trust. By dessert, Grace's appetite was gone. She stood to leave, but Oliver grabbed her hand under the table. "Stay," he whispered. It was the first time Grace realized that whatever storm this house had weathered before her arrival, she was now part of its shelter. The charity gala was the kind of event Grace had only ever seen on TV. Chandeliers dripping light, champagne glasses clinking, women in gowns that shimmered like moonlight on water. She felt like an imposter from the moment she stepped into the ballroom, her modest dress borrowed from a friend. Ethan had insisted she come. He said, "Oliver wants you there." But she could feel eyes on her, weighing her, measuring her against invisible standards. An older man in a tux approached her near the hors d'oeuvres table. "You must be Ethan's new companion," he said, his voice slick with insinuation. "I'm Oliver's nanny," she replied, keeping her tone polite. He chuckled. "That's what they call it these days, isn't it?" Grace's hand tightened around her clutch. "Excuse me?" Before she could turn away, Ethan appeared at her side, his presence a sudden wall of quiet authority. "You'll speak to her with respect, Davis," he said evenly. The man flushed, muttered something, and walked off. Grace blinked at Ethan. "You didn't have to." "Yes, I did." His voice was low, final. "You work for me, Grace, but you also protect my son. I won't let anyone diminish that." Something in her chest shifted at his words, and she wasn't sure if it was gratitude or something deeper, more dangerous. The gala ended late, and the drive back to the estate was wrapped in comfortable silence. Oliver had fallen asleep in the car, his small head resting against Grace's arm. When they arrived, Ethan carried his son upstairs while Grace slipped into the kitchen to make tea. She found him later on the terrace, the night sky sprawling above like a velvet map of silver.
He stood with his hands braced on the railing, the wind teasing his hair. "Thank you for tonight," he said without turning. "It's part of the job," I replied softly. He glanced at her, eyes darker than the sky. "No, it's more than that. You've brought something into this house that I thought was gone." The air seemed to tighten between them. Grace's heart thudded as she stepped closer. For a moment it felt like the world had narrowed to just them, his gaze, her breath, the quiet pull of something unnamed.
Then a sound broke the spell, Oliver's cry from upstairs. Ethan turned immediately. "Nightmare, I'll go." Grace stood alone on the terrace, the tea cooling in her hands, wondering what might have happened if the night had stayed silent. The trouble started 2 days later. Grace was in the kitchen when Jameson entered, looking uncomfortable. "Mr. Hawthorne wishes to see you in his study." Ethan's study, the locked room. She followed Jameson, pulse ticking faster. Inside, Ethan stood behind his desk, a tablet in his hand. He turned the screen toward her. Photos filled it, grainy, taken from odd angles. In them, she appeared to be slipping items into her bag, silverware, a small vase, even a watch. Her stomach dropped. "That's not... These are staged." "They were sent to me anonymously this morning," Ethan said, his voice hard. "You think I'd steal from you?" "I think," he said slowly, "that I don't know you as well as I thought." The hurt cut deeper than she expected. "And yet, you trusted me with your son." Oliver's voice rang from the doorway. "Dad, what's going on?" "Go upstairs, buddy." But Oliver didn't move. His eyes darted between them, panic creeping in. That night, when the house was dark, Grace discovered his room empty. The storm outside made the road slick and treacherous. Ethan's voice was tight as he spoke into the phone, coordinating search teams. Grace paced the foyer, her heart in her throat. Then a thought struck her. "The church," she whispered. "What?" Ethan frowned. "He told me once it was his safe place." Minutes later, they were pulling up outside the small church on the edge of town. Inside, candles flickered in the dim light, the smell of wax and old wood filling the air. Oliver sat near the altar, knees drawn up, staring at the stained-glass window. Grace knelt beside him. "Sweetheart, you scared us." "I prayed," he said simply. "I asked God to send me someone who wouldn't leave. He sent you, but now Dad's mad at you." Ethan stood behind them, silent. Grace stroked Oliver's hair, her eyes meeting Ethan's over the boy's head. Something in his gaze was shifting, doubt cracking, something warmer pushing through. Back at the estate, the tension was brittle. Ethan's board of directors had caught wind of the incident and were pressing him to remove the liability. "She's not a liability," Ethan snapped in the conference call. "They all are eventually," one board member said. "Protect the company." After the call, Ethan found Grace in the garden, the winter air painting her breath white. "She can handle rumors," she said before he could speak. "But I can't stay if you believe them." "I don't," he said quickly. "Not anymore." "Then you'll have to choose, them or something else." He didn't answer right away. His jaw worked, his hands clenched in his pockets. "I need time," he admitted. Grace nodded, though the ache in her chest told her that time might not be on their side. It happened quietly, without drama. Grace rose before dawn, the house still sleeping. She packed only what she'd brought, moving silently through the halls. Her prayer journal lay open on the nightstand, the last line written last night. "Lord, if this is not where I'm meant to be, give me the courage to leave." She left the journal behind.
Downstairs, Jameson stood by the front door, holding her coat. His expression was unreadable. "The boy will miss you," he said. "I'll miss him more," she replied softly. At the train station, the air was cold enough to sting her lungs. The 6:15 inbound was already idling, a thin fog curling around its wheels. Ethan appeared then, not in a rush, not shouting for her to stay, just standing across the platform, hands in his coat pockets, watching. For a moment she thought he might cross the distance, but he didn't. When the whistle blew, she boarded without looking back. The silence in the Hawthorne estate grew heavier each day she was gone. Oliver refused breakfast, lunch, even his favorite macaroni. He spent hours in his room or in the echo room, his shouts bouncing off the walls but carrying no joy. Ethan tried to fill the space, more hours at home, extra games, trips to the park. Nothing worked. One evening, Ethan passed the library and found Oliver sitting inside the collapsed blanket fort, holding the diner apron Grace had once worn. "She's not coming back," Oliver said quietly, not looking up. "I made a mistake, buddy." Ethan swallowed against the knot in his throat. "Then fix it." Oliver's voice was small but firm. It was Jameson who found the prayer journal. It had slipped behind the nightstand in Grace's room. He brought it to Ethan, unsure what to do. Ethan hesitated, then opened it. The handwriting was neat but unpretentious, the ink smudged in places where tears must have fallen. Most entries were about Oliver, prayers for his healing, his laughter, his heart. Others were for Ethan, for his grief to lift, for him to remember what love felt like. Not a single word about money. By the time he reached the last page, his vision blurred. She'd left not because she was guilty, but because she refused to stay where her integrity was doubted. He closed the journal slowly. "Get the car," he told Jameson. "We're going to find her." The search wasn't easy. Grace hadn't gone home. Her apartment was already empty. Her aunt said she was helping out somewhere, but wouldn't say where. Ethan took leave from the company, ignoring the board's outrage. "Handle it yourselves," he told them. 2 days later, he found her. She was at a small community shelter in a rough part of town, serving soup with the same quiet grace she'd shown at the diner. She looked surprised but not flustered when she saw him. "Ethan." "I came to bring you back," he said plainly. Her expression softened, then tightened again. "Your family won't accept me, and I can't live in a place where every kindness is questioned."
Before he could reply, a small voice piped up behind him. "Please, Grace." Oliver stood there, clutching the diner apron like a lifeline. Grace's composure wavered. The three of them sat on a bench outside the shelter, the late afternoon sun dipping low. "I resigned," Ethan said suddenly. Grace blinked. "You what?" "From the company. I couldn't run it and keep letting other people dictate my life." She searched his face, looking for any trace of insincerity. There was none. Oliver leaned against her. "It's better when you're with us." She closed her eyes, torn between longing and fear. "If I come back, it's not just for a job. I won't survive leaving twice." Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out her prayer journal. "Then don't leave again. We can start over, as a family." For the first time in weeks, she let herself imagine it, not as a fantasy, but as something that might truly be possible. Winter still gripped the estate grounds, but the olive tree in the garden stood stubbornly alive. Its twisted trunk was gnarled, its roots deep, older than the house itself. Grace and Oliver sat beneath it, the boy tracing the lines in the bark. "Did you know that olive trees can live for thousands of years? No matter how harsh the storm, they grow new branches. They don't give up." Oliver tilted his head. Like you? She smiled faintly. Like all of us, if we choose to be. Ethan joined them, lowering himself onto the bench beside her. I want this to be where we start over, he said. Grace studied him, wary. Start over how? As more than a nanny, as part of our lives, permanently. The wind rustled the tree's silver-green leaves. She didn't answer right away. The weight of her yes or no could shape all their futures. But as Oliver's small hand slid into hers, she felt roots take hold in her own heart. Not everyone welcomed the idea. Ethan's father, a tall, silver-haired man with the kind of voice that had once commanded boardrooms, arrived the next afternoon. I hear you've formed an attachment to the help, he said without preamble. Grace held her ground. I care for Oliver, and I respect your son. You respect his money, the elder Hawthorne said coolly. Tell me your price to walk away quietly. Grace's breath caught, not from temptation, but from the insult. There is no price, she said evenly, because I'm not for sale. Ethan entered the room then, his voice like steel. She stays, Dad. End of discussion. The older man's eyes narrowed. You'll regret this. Not as much as I'd regret letting her go, Ethan replied. It happened on a Saturday morning. Grace was in the kitchen with Oliver, teaching him how to flip pancakes when the smell of smoke drifted in. First, she thought it was the pan, but then Oliver pointed. Smoke curled under the butler's pantry door. Within seconds, the alarm screamed. Out the back, now, Grace ordered, ushering Oliver toward the garden. But when she turned, he was gone, darted back toward the dining room to grab a drawing he had made for her. She found him coughing in the thickening smoke. Wrapping her arms around him, she pushed toward the nearest exit, heat clawing at her skin. They stumbled into the cold air just as Ethan reached them, panic stark in his eyes. He pulled Oliver close, then turned to Grace, her sleeve singed, a red mark blooming on her forearm. She tried to laugh it off. Guess I'll have to wear long sleeves for a while. But Ethan's voice was hoarse. You could have died. The fire was contained before it did major damage, but Ethan refused to leave Grace's side while she was checked at the hospital. Later, in the quiet of her room, he sat beside her bed, his hand brushing hers. I've spent 3 years locking my heart away, and you broke the lock without even trying. She swallowed hard, her eyes stinging. I love you, Grace. The words landed with a weight and warmth that stole her breath. She searched his face, seeing no hesitation, no shadows. You were my miracle, she whispered. Oliver was in on the plan from the start. He told him, we're going to ask her to stay forever. The boy grinned. Does that mean I get to call her Mom? They hid the ring, a simple, elegant band with a single diamond, inside her prayer journal, tucked between the pages where she had written about answered prayers. That evening, under the olive tree, Ethan handed her the journal. You left this behind once. I think you should open it. She flipped it open, her breath catching when the ring slid into her palm. Ethan knelt before her, his voice steady. Grace Molina, you saved my son, healed my heart, and showed me that love isn't about perfect timing. It's about choosing each other every day. Will you marry me? She laughed through tears. You already know the answer. Say it anyway. Yes. Oliver whooped and wrapped his arms around them both, the olive tree's branches swaying above like a silent blessing. The wedding was small, held in the same church where they'd found Oliver that stormy night. Sunlight poured through the stained glass, painting the pews in jewel tones. As they exchanged vows, Grace felt the weight of every prayer she had ever written, and the joy of every one that had been answered in ways she hadn't imagined. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Oliver slipped his small hand into hers. I told you, he whispered. God sent you. She smiled through tears. He sent me too. And for the first time in a very long time, Grace knew she was exactly where she was meant to be.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a like and leave a kind comment. To help the channel stay motivated to create more great videos, please hit the subscribe button. Wishing you happiness and peace in the light and love of God.